Good evening. We're going to read Genesis chapter 19 tonight. If y'all will remember, last night Abraham talked to God and asked him to reconsider destroying Sodom and Gomorrah if he could find 50, then 40, and 30, so forth, all the way down to 10 people. That was the last number that was mentioned. God promised if he could find 10 people in Sodom, he would not destroy the two cities. So we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 19 tonight, and it's titled God Rescues Lot. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening. Now these are the two angels that were walking with God earlier that met Abraham. And Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Now, the men who sat in the gate, I have heard this, the men who sat in the gate were considered the elders of the city. So, hey, Miss Twyla, think about the people in your area that are trusted people. They might not be rich, but they are well thought of. People trust them, and maybe they go to them for advice. Maybe the city leaders, that kind of thing. A person who was not well thought of wouldn't be sitting at the gate with the other elders. So Lot was sitting in the gate at Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." Now that almost sounds like he was trying to get them in and get them out without sounding rude. That's what it sounds like to me. Could be not, I don't know. They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now, they were going to basically camp out in town square, out in the open where anybody could see them and anybody could get to them. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Now, that term, "know them," is the same term that's used in other things where the man went into his wife and he knew her. They consummated their marriage. They knew each other and became one, and that's what these men were wanting to do to these angels. They were wanting to bring them out and pass them around and have sex with them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please." Now that's exactly what you're thinking that is, that he was offering his daughters to these men. "Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." Now I don't know if he recognized them as angels or not, but he knew they were strangers and he considered them safe in his house. He shouldn't have offered his daughters. He should have just told them, "Beat it and go on home." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fella came to sojourn, and he has become the judge." They're talking about Lot. "Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men, the angels inside, but the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house. I'm so sorry, both great and small, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. Now that's funny. I'm sorry, that's funny. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone that you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become so great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went and said to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters. Remember, back then, once you were engaged, it was considered a done deal, even though the marriage had not been finalized and everything had done. They were considered his sons-in-law. So now you think about it, Lot and his wife, the 2 daughters, and the 2 sons. That wouldn't have even been 2, 4, 6. That would have been 6 people. That wasn't even 10 people. Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. They laughed at him. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. If God had wanted to, he could have just left them there. If he wanted to linger, that meant he really didn't want to leave the city. He wanted to stay. And as they brought them out, one said, Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. He didn't want to be in the wilderness, he wanted to be in the city. And I don't know what was so important about that. I would be getting up, grabbing the stuff that was important to me and hitting the road, and I'm sure you would too. Unless you had such a hook where you were living, if it was so important to you that you didn't want to leave, even knowing that God was fixing to destroy it. That makes no sense to me. He said to him, Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city is called Zoar, Z-O-A-R. And then the next section is titled, God Destroys Sodom. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now this was not just a slowing up as you go by, where people are stopped on the side of the road with a broke down car, and you're just glancing at them to see what's going on. She looked back because she wanted to be there. She didn't want to leave to begin with. In fact, she came from Sodom, I'm sure, because Lot wasn't married when he moved there, so that's where he found his wife, and she didn't want to leave. Even knowing it was being destroyed, she looked back wishing she was there. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Lot was saved because he was Abraham's family. If he'd have been working on his own faithfulness and righteousness, he wouldn't have been saved. Abraham being his family is what saved him and his daughters. Lot and his daughters. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters. So he didn't want to stay there anyway. They told him to go to the wilderness, and he didn't want to go, but when he got to Zoar, he didn't, and he went to the wilderness with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So the daughters, I guess, taken after their mama, they were not raised like they should have been raised. Lot should have stayed in Zoar or moved to another city so his daughters could find husbands, but the daughters ought to have known better than to behave that way. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi, Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Now, that's the end of chapter 19. That's some pretty bad stuff. I really don't think they were worried about making their father's bloodline continue. They just wanted to do what they wanted to do. They wanted a baby, and that was the way they thought they could get it. And I'm sure as we go on through the Bible, the Moabites and the Ammonites, you'll find out some of the things they got up to. From what I remember, they pretty much lived like their mamas and their granddaddy did. And I've got a note over here that says, had the daughters no teaching about right and wrong. They weren't righteous either, neither more than Lot was. So something to think about. It is a lot to think about. People don't act like the way they raise their kids has an effect on things, but it does. When you raise your children to act like they've had some home raising, they behave well. I used to substitute at Luverne School, and I started out in the elementary school, and then they needed high school, and so I worked up there, and I enjoyed doing it for the most part. But I could go into a classroom, and then generally within 5 minutes, I could just about point out which children were taught to show respect to adults and which were not. I had a little boy one time, and he was probably first grade. As long as I live, I don't think I'll ever forget it. He snapped his fingers at me. I said something. I was telling everybody to sit down. Maybe they were coming in after recess or PE or something. And they came in, and I was trying to get them settled down in their chairs and everything so we could get to work. And he snapped his finger at me and did his head like that and said, "You can't tell me what to do." I said, "No, sir, I sure can't, but I can send you to the office and let them tell you what to do." Now, that child he got that from somewhere. He might not have got it from mom and daddy, but he got it from somewhere. And somebody let that child know that he could act that way and get away with it, and nobody was going to do anything to him. And I'm not bragging that my children were perfect. They were far from it. They got in trouble a lot. But I will tell you a story about one of my children. They were in the band, and I was subbing in the band. And the child I'm talking about did not have the same, because I had remarried, so we didn't have the same last name. So everybody didn't recognize that was my child. I'm trying not to give too many details, but anyway, there's probably about 70 or 80 kids in the band room. And I told them, I said, now listen, the teacher has left y'all work to do, and I'm not going to expect y'all to sit here and be totally silent. I said, but this is a big room, and it's got big sound in it. I said, so you're not going to get loud. If you get loud, I will tell you that you've got to be completely quiet. I said, but if you want to work together on these, it was not a test, it was really just busy work. I said, you can work on your papers and visit quietly together. And one of the girls in the classroom stood up and pointed to my child and said, hey, so-and-so, why are you acting so righteous and holy? I think was the word she used. She said, this is not how you usually act in band, meaning my child cut up, carried on foolishness, as my grandmama used to say. And my child pointed to me and said, because that's my mama, and if I get in trouble in here, she's going to kill me when she gets home. And every child in there was looking at me, a totally new look at who I was, But you could tell which kids knew to behave, and they knew how to behave, and they showed respect to their teachers and other staff, and there were some that did not. And some kids that you would look at and you would think, but they did. I've got a lot of funny stories, but if I tell too many, people are going to figure out who I'm talking about, and I don't want to do that. But I saw some children disrespect their parents and grandparents in a way I would have never expected. And then I saw some children who showed deep levels of love and respect to their parents. And it was and I always, if I saw that, I always told the parents if I knew them. I always bragged on their children, because people need to know when their kids are doing good. They need to know when they're doing bad too, but they need to know when they're doing good. So it absolutely makes a difference how you raise your children, how you allow them to behave, and how you expect them to behave. Now, I'm not talking about special needs children who don't have control over what they're doing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your typical child who it's obvious that they're the boss at their house. Even if they're little bitty kids, they're the boss at their house, and nobody can tell them what to do. It's obvious. Everybody can see it. And I see a lot of people saying, those teachers are not going to tell my kids what to do. And I'm thinking, why are you sending them to school? They're not going to learn anything if they can't even tell them to sit down and do their work. How do you expect them to learn anything? But it's become an epidemic. It's getting worse all the time. All you got to do is turn on Facebook Reels or TikTok, and you can see all kind of kids who it's obvious they have not been raised to ever hear the word no, or to be told they've got to do something. And we're doing our children and our grandchildren a disservice when they do that. But anyway, that was chapter 19. Join us tomorrow night, and we're going to read Genesis chapter 20.